and elsewhere. It is now clear that the policy was mistaken and that it would have been better to set up a number of smaller states corresponding with the pre-colonial ethnic boundaries. At the same time, it must be pointed out that to have done this would have involved the demolition of existing administrative structures, involving a good deal of confusion and hardship at the very outset of independence. There existed an excellent administrative machine ready for the new Nigerian government to take over. The attraction of the Kano ruler was that they had long and successful experience of government. They therefore offered an obvious choice to head the new experiment. It was in fact difficult at that time to see an alternative for the early stages of independence. These were the words of Sir Peter Smithers on why Nigeria was a total mistake. On the 1st October 1960, the coalition government of the NPC and the NCNC took office, with Tafawa Balewa as prime minister, precisely as the colonial office had ordained. But the event that symbolized the new relationship between the British and the Fulani was the formal return of the flag of the Caliphate, with its motto in Arabic, "Victory comes from God alone," which took place the following month. And now I'm going to take my own first break too. My third break. So my third break, which is second to the last break, and then I'm going to stop reading. I'm going to take in your reactions. You can react to all you have listened to for the next 1 hour when I take my last break, but this is second to the last. So I'm taking this, and I'm also going to read your comment too. Oh, that feels better. Thank you. So let us continue now. Independence Day, we are reading about the 1st of October, how that came to be and all that. So here is what, somebody put down too in their memoir. The final token of the changed status of the Queen's Own Nigeria Regiment was a ceremony that took place on the Doba ground at Sokoto in November 1960. The flag of Sultan Atahiru Hamadu, kept since 1903 by the 1st Battalion as a trophy of their victory, was paraded and solemnly handed over to the reigning Sultan of Sokoto in the presence of the Premier of the Northern Region. Writing in 1969, Sherwood Smith attributed the inspiration for the title of his memoirs to the speech given on Independence Day, 1st October 1966, by Balewa. We are grateful to the British officers whom we have known, first as masters, and then as leaders, and finally as partners, but always as friends. That is the end of book 2, chapter 7 of A Fatherless People. See, we are about to go to book 3, a bit of a lift. So thank you so much once again that you had the time to share this moment with us. Now we will be going into chapter 8, the start of chapter 8, the short road from independence to Biafra. Very, very important, right? You have to listen. All ears now. What if a man should take upon him to be king? Cromwell. What if a man should take upon himself to be king? The British Army in Nigeria. In front of the main entrance to the British Houses of Parliament at Westminster stands a statue of a soldier with his sword in his right hand and the Bible in his left. It is a permanent reminder to the parliamentarians that democracy in England was fathered by the army. Oliver Cromwell, monarchist, defender of the faith, parliamentarian, and a soldier, was the man who instituted rule by a parliament of the people. This was after he had beheaded the king on 30th January 1649, and by so doing put an end to the tradition of despotic rule of monarchs. The first parliament having fallen short of his expectations, he chased them out in a military coup on 20th April 1653. Only afterwards did he bring back both king and parliament to share power on the terms of a new constitution drawn up by his army. Ever since the reign of Cromwell, British statesmen have known that the control of the army is the linchpin of all governments. As they were making their preparations for the grant of independence to Nigeria, the officials of the British Colonial Office had this important lesson of history firmly in mind. Sherwood Smith had made clear the imperative of northern control of the army and the police force in his confidential advice note to Balewa. The point was reiterated by Sir Peter Smithers in his letter, in which he explained the control of the police and the army had been the chief difficulty. That the North controlled the security forces at independence was therefore no accident or coincidence. The war against educated natives in the army. The shape of the armed forces in Nigeria had evolved according to the needs and sensitivities of the colonial government. In the beginning, when the military objective had been the conquest of the Fulani Empire, the West African Frontier Force had been recruited amongst the Hausa, the Yoruba, and Nupe. After the First World War, the Colonial Office conducted a review of its policy of recruitment to the West African Frontier Force. The report, which was produced by the Inspector General of the Forces in 1923, identified the tribes that should henceforth be recruited from. So, from their report, listen. Southerners were perceived as timorous and secretive in character, almost entirely pagan, and much addicted to fetish worship, and are inclined to be suspicious of Europeans. They were not recruited into the military in large numbers because it was felt that they lacked fighting spirit and did not possess the qualifications necessary to make good soldiers. As for northern ethnic groups, it drew a distinction between the Muslim far north and the pagan lower north, but found that they were of a franker and bolder disposition. It found that the Hausa of the far north were brave, intelligent, easy to discipline, and show a remarkable spirit of devotion to their officers. Similarly, the Fulani, also of the far north, were found to demonstrate a decided power of command necessary for a good non-commissioned officer. Although the pagan tribes of the lower north had many of the military attributes of the tribes of the upper north, however, they were not considered as intelligent. The comment that the Southerners lacked fighting spirit was a convenient untruth, which was to be much repeated to explain Northern domination of the armed forces. There was more to the matter than the report was admitting to. The real reason was that the lessons of the 1918 armed challenge to British rule by the combined forces of the Egba and Owu Yoruba tribes, while the First World War was going on, had not been forgotten. That uprising was the only all-out war between the British and the Owu rebels. It had also led to the recall of Lugard as Governor General. The claim that the Southerners did not possess the qualifications necessary to make good soldiers, on the other hand, is less open to question, since the armed forces of a state depends upon the unquestioning commitment of its members to the state's defense. Thus, the report's recommendations were a reflection of the colonial administration's assessment of where the long-term threats to its longevity would come from. Having already determined that the level of education that had been allowed in the southern Nigeria had been a grave policy error for the empire's, grave error, and increasing the threats by recruiting and training military personnel from the south in great numbers. These political considerations meant that at the time of the report, Nigerian army was 70% northern. 70% northern. It was only the exigencies of the Second World War which required educated Nigerians to be trained to do the work that had previously been done by British soldiers, and to fight in the densely forested regions of India and Burma, that the recruitment policy was modified. At the end of the war, after the empire's needs had been met, most of these Nigerians who had seen combat were quickly demobilized. Nigerianization of the army. At the onset of the nationalist struggle for independence following the end of the war, the Nigerian army was really the British army in Nigeria. Although Nigerians had formed the bulk of its fighting force since its creation as the West African Frontier Force, the officers were almost exclusively British. It was not until 1948 that Lieutenant Lord Victor Ugboma became the first Nigerian to be commissioned, that the security services would, be last aspect of governance that a colonial power would expose its subjects to, stood no reason. Thus, whilst the drive to promote Nigerians to senior posts in the public service had started in 1948 with the creation of a Nigerianization Commission, that initiative did not extend to the army. It was the sudden hardening of the American stance on decolonization in the wake of Suez, coupled with the near breakup of the Federation following the 1953 independence motion crisis, which now injected urgency into the task of assembling a Nigerian army that would preserve the Nigeria legacy. Although they were now resigned to the need to bring in educated natives into the Nigerian army, there was still an important judgment to be made about which part of the South the new recruits were to come from and which section of the army they were to be recruited into. Having decided upon a political alliance of the North and the East to rule the country at independence, it followed that the composition of the army should reflect the political order that it was to protect. So therefore, in view of the backwardness of the northern region in education, it is very surprising that the first 5 regular officers to graduate from Sandhurst were all northerners. In 1954, only 85 boys from the north passed the school certificate examination, compared with 1,334 boys in the south. All 5 northerners had been at the same school, government. At the same time, there was a conscious drive to recruit Igbos into the army at senior level. Easterners had predominated among the cadets taken for officer training in period from 1955 to 1958, when selection was entirely in the hands of British officers. The ethnic stratification of the officer class of the new Nigerian army was to be the last act of the British Empire in Nigeria. In the situation where, at independence, 2/3 of the officers in the Nigerian army were from the East, a clash for supremacy between the two alliance partners, North and East, would only be a matter of time. The army, being the ultimate guarantor of political control, the North had little to fear, so long as it was essentially a northern army. But a sudden surge in the recruitment of Igbo officers would mean that the North would no longer be sure of the loyalty of the armed forces, and this was bound to feed anxieties. This manifested in the Balewa government introducing a quota system into army recruitment to stem the Igbo tide. In the meantime, the challenge for the British remained what to do with the graduates who had now joined the army. Wahala. So, no attempt was made to advertise for graduates to enter the army before 1960, either for the fighting arms or the technical corps. There were quite a number of Nigerian doctors who had qualified abroad, who might have been attracted into the army earlier, but none was commissioned before 1961. There was one unexpected graduate recruit in 1957, Odumegu Ojukwu, who had taken his BA in history at Oxford in 1955 and then served as assistant district officer in the administrative service for 2 years, was commissioned in March 1958. So the suspicion of educated natives was, of course, long-standing. The concerns over the new graduate class coming into the army was grounded in the fear that they would have been exposed to radical, possibly communist thought in the course of their undergraduate studies. At the outset, the policy was to contain the risk by keeping this suspect group away from the fighting corps. So, 2 graduates were commissioned before independence, Ojukwu in 1958 and Olutoye in 1960. The latter had a BSc degree and was mostly employed in the Army Education Service. Rising to the head of it in 1964, 3 more graduates were given combatant commissions after 1960. Rotimi and Ifeajuna in 1961 and Ademoyega in 1962. Rotimi had been a cadet at school, Rotimi had been a cadet at school at King's College when the first unit was formed there. Ifeajuna was an outstanding athlete who had won the gold medal for the high jump at the Commonwealth Games. Ademoyega had been an administrative officer in the Federal Public Service for a short time between graduating and joining the army. After these three, no other graduates were given combatant commissions. All other graduates who entered the army after 1960 were given direct commissions and were recruited specifically to practice their profession, their professional skills as doctors, engineers, or teachers. These officers had no more than the most perfunctory military training and generally served in the headquarters or technical units, as they would not normally be in command of any considerable body of troops. These graduates posed no threats to the government. The attempt to breach the Niger. Against the background of the extreme measures that had been taken to ensure an NPC victory in the independence elections, the British were in no doubt that the rickety alliance which they had forged between the North and the East would not hold. It was a marriage of the strangest bedfellows, and not just because of the Muslim-Christian divide. The one alliance partner was driven by individual aspiration and industry. The other was communal and authority-led. The East, and principally the Igbos, were natural democrats and egalitarians, amongst whom the institution of hierarchy through chieftaincy was a recent import that had failed to take root. In contrast, the lead partners in the North were aristocratic and traditional. This was an alliance of convenience with the sole objective of sharing power and of keeping the political opponents in the West out of power. The alliance was under constant threat, with entreaties by Awolowo to Azikiwe for a substitute alliance between East and West. For example, I hold it. I mean, this was one of the entreaties to Azikiwe, come and join us. You and these people have nothing in common. They are Northerners, and you have different approach. You have different worldview. Come and join us in the West so that we can form government and help Nigeria somehow, a peace. I hold it as a fact that if the Action Group and the NCNC, both of which parties have a monopoly of political following in the South, and at least 1/3 of the political followership in the North, could come together, then they would serve a catalyst to the political system in the North to ensure the creation of more states in the Northern region, entrench liberal democracy in the country, and infinitely increase the tempo of progress in the Federation as a whole. I also hold it as a fact that such combination is sure to win a landslide victory at a subsequent federal election. In all these connections, I hold it as a fact that, in view of the standing and stature of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, of the problem of the North, the problem of Nigeria, and the problem of taking over power in the Federation would be contrived to bring him back into politics and to combine and bring him together under his leadership all the truly nationalists, progressive, and radical elements in the Federation. It was a kind of like a sweet or sweetened offer. But Azikiwe was not acting on his own. Azikiwe was under the control of the British. Okay? The British that had compromise on him. Azikiwe will do everything that work against the people he was supposed to be leading. He was going to do everything the British wanted, unfortunately. So, with Balewa installed as prime minister to keep power the northern region only had to remain one, and to secure an alliance with either the eastern or alternatively the western region. To put Awolowo's desired alliance between the east and the west further out of reach, the British crowned the alliance between the north and the east, which they had engineered by appointing Azikiwe to the ceremonial office of Governor General of the Federation. The event that followed in the immediate post-independence years were dominated by the West's effort to replace the North as the East alliance partner. On one occasion, another effort, I was to make direct contact with Dr. Azikiwe myself. But the two of us, having been opposed politically for upwards of 2 decades, I had to prepare the ground. I wrote him a nice letter when he became Governor General. I took time to attend all the functions which were held to make his inauguration as Governor General. Eventually, on the 15th of August 1961, I met Dr. Azikiwe myself. I met Dr. Azikiwe himself at 5 p.m. in London. I used that meeting as a sort of attempt to break the ice. On the 20th of December 1961, in Nigeria, at the State House, at 12:30 p.m., I met Dr. Azikiwe again. That was after I had been conferred Doctor of Laws degree of the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. On that occasion, I made it absolutely plain to Dr. Azikiwe that I was prepared to serve under him, and that in the event of his wanting to stand for the presidential election, I assured him of all action group votes, as I was not going to stand as a candidate myself. This was Obafemi Awolowo, Chief Obafemi Awolowo. Awolowo's efforts to build an alliance with the East were doomed to failure because the North, with the support of the British Colonial Office, had its own strategies to ensure that that alliance would never happen. At its core was what looked like an innocent appeal for unity, an all-party alliance under Balewa. So here, to further this overriding need for unity, my colleagues in the Council of Ministers and I have decided to give the country a lead by inviting the leaders of the action group to form with us a truly national government composed of members of the main parties in the country. And here I must pay tribute to Dr. Azikiwe, to Chief Awolowo, Dr. Ndele, and to the leader of my own party, the Sardauna of Sokoto, for supporting me in this decision. I and my colleagues of the NCNC and NPC hold out our hands in welcome to the action group members of the council. And I promise you that we shall do our utmost to ensure that the deliberation of the council are held in an atmosphere devoid of strife and narrow party prejudice. It was a strategy that will split the action group and throw the Western region into crisis before using the breakaway party from the action group as new alliance partners to replace the NCNC. What followed over the 10 years following independence was determined action to neutralize the threat to northern rule by the use of the army, spawning the Western region political crisis of 1962 and the military occupation of the region, the treason trial of the 1963, leading to the imprisonment of the main political actors in the Southwest, the uprising in the TV division, leading to the military occupation of that area from 1964, the military crisis in the Western region in 1965, leading to a virtual civil war in that region, the first military coup in January 1966, the military counter coup of July 1966, and the Biafran War of 1967, leading to the military conquest of Biafra in January 1970. This is where I'm going to draw the, I'm going to kind of draw the reading. My 2 hours is done. And now we have an hour of reaction. If you are watching me and you have possibly been with me for the past hour or the hours, that line on your screen, that number on that screen is yours to dial.